How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Taped Podcast, the most inconsistent podcast in the world. We're your host, as always, myself, MickyT.
And me, Nostalgia.
And welcome to another edition of our Worst to Bests. And as always with our Worst to Best, we always have a guest. This guest hasn't been on since the Paramore Hayley Williams Worst to Best, but we brought him back for this one. And of that, of course, is Abel, aka Mr. A. How are you doing, dude?
See, unlike Hayley Williams, I actually have a major crush on Rivers Cuomo. Like, I genuinely want to kiss him.
Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
That man's beautiful.
And of course, today we're going to be doing a Worst to Best on a band that was pretty much made to be ranked from Worst to Best. And if you couldn't tell already, today we're going to be doing a Worst to Best on the legendary alternative rock band Weezer. It's time.
Ooh.
It's about time. And yeah, you should know the drill by now about how these Worst to Bests work. So yeah, I don't think we'll waste any more time, and we'll get right into our lists. So starting at number 15, my opinion, Weezer's worst album is Pacific Daydream.
My number 15 pick is Raditude.
Mine is Pacific Daydream.
Alright.
I'll go last.
Okay. You know, there are a lot of contenders to place as Weezer's worst album, but for me, Pacific Daydream is easily the band's absolute worst record. Say what you will about Make Believe and Raditude, but they don't sound as grating and as annoyingly produced as Pacific Daydream does. Now, I think Weezer were just trying to go for another summery and bright album that feels akin to the White Album, and it doesn't start off too bad, actually, but I don't care for a lot of it, honestly. It just kind of drives itself off of a cliff when Feels Like Summer rolls around. I truly think it's terrible from that point onward. You know, this thing just doesn't feel like a Weezer album. It's more like other artists just writing songs under the name and putting out some of the most trite, generic, overproduced and god-awful tracks under the Weezer name. You know, the vocal processing on Rivers' voice is often pretty sloppy, the hooks are very uninspired and cliched, the songwriting feels very trite and uninteresting. Weezer embraced so many terrible and obnoxious cliches that millennial pop is known for, and the production is so squeaky clean and overblown that it's migraine-inducing. You know, it's such a tiring listen that only sets you up for headaches and boredom. It's Weezer at their most uncreative and formulaic. It has little to no interesting moments bar maybe Mexican Fender, and it has some of Weezer's absolute worst songs on it because the production is terrible, and they're just so offensively inoffensive, in my opinion. Feels Like Summer is the worst thing Weezer has ever done, and I stand by that. They could literally kill a child, and it wouldn't be as much of a crime as creating that monstrosity was. So yeah, Pacific Daydream bad.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so, I'll just start this off by saying that, saying this album was a disappointment. This is an understatement. Like, unlike a lot of other bad albums in Weezer's discography, I can't even say this album is funny. It's just lifeless and uninteresting and overblown in certain places to me. The album, however, starts off pretty good. The whole album is definitely trying to tap into that millennial pop sound that pretty much entirely consisted of, like, you know, very reverbed vocals and squeaky clean production and the very overblown choruses. But me and a lot of other people have definitely grown to become nostalgic for this era of pop music, regardless of that. And the first two songs of Pacific Daydream evoke this same feeling out of me. Except the difference here is that Weezer actually has talent underneath a lot of their subpar work. So instead of having the nostalgia be the only thing that carries these tracks for me, this nostalgic sound is used to talk and kind of like romanticize the past, which is shown by the constant mentions of past summers or music, like in the song Beach Boys. But after the first two tracks of this album, the way that the nostalgic sound is used up until the third track reveals itself to most likely be unintentional. Feels Like Summer perfectly encapsulates what I think is wrong with this record, because while I think this sound isn't inherently flawed, no sound is, it's not something a band like Weezer can pull off. Weezer has been around for around 29 years. I'm not exactly sure. So it would have taken a miracle for them to be completely in touch with the popular sound of the current day. And the overblown choruses and booming 808 bass, which funny enough was present on the White Album deluxe track, I Love the USA. So that kind of just like a bad omen for what was to come later. Proves that this band is just out of their depth when it comes to this sound.
Yeah. Yeah, my number 15 pick was Raditude, an album which honestly is a little difficult to dissect and like explore and explain my opinions on because of how unbelievably dog shit it is. It borderlines on the so bad it's good category. What were you saying, Mick?
Was that a pun when you said dog shit?
Oh, it wasn't, but I'll pretend it was. Yeah, this. Yeah, this project just borders on being so bad it's good. It's, almost every single track on here is so just jaw-droppingly terrible in a lot of cases, like the most obvious ways that I just cannot take this album seriously in any capacity. It sounds like one big joke, but knowing Weezer and knowing that it probably was not a fucking joke, is, I don't know if it makes the album funny, if it makes it sad, but the experience I get listening to Raditude isn't one where I particularly enjoy the music for its positive qualities. I enjoy the music because of how devoid of any positive qualities it is. There's absolutely no way that any of these songs are like sincere. There's no way that Rivers is just getting laid so much and partying so much that he has to write a whole song about how he just cannot stop himself. There's no way. That's fiction.
It's not fiction overall, because Rivers Cuomo is an absolute Chad, and you'll respect
he
that.
does have sex. He does have quite a bit of sex. Like he's tired of sex.
He does. He's tired of it.
Literally.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe, but partying.
Yeah, no, it's out of character.
Maybe like a D&D night or something.
Maybe
it's not. Doesn't really fit.
No,
I agree.
Yeah. This album's a big joke. I don't know what else to say about it.
Okay, moving on to best and worst tracks. My favorite track from Pacific Daydream is Mexican Fender. The worst tracks are Feels Like Summer, Happy Hour, QB Blitz, Get Right, La Mancha Screwjob, and Any Friend of Diane's.
My favorite tracks off of Pacific Daydream are Beach Boys and Mexican Fender, and my least favorite track is Feels Like Summer. I don't remember a lot of the album, so I can't really pick many tracks I hate. It's just kind of like air going into my ears. So, yeah.
Understandable.
My favorite track on Raditude was If You're Wondering If I Want You To, I Want You To. My least favorite tracks are The Girl Got Hot, I Can't Stop Partying, Love Is the Answer, Let It All Hang Out, and In the Mall.
Those are some banging song titles, am I right?
You bet.
Okay, moving on to our number 14 picks. I chose Make Believe.
I also chose
Make Believe. Why y'all copying me? I chose Make Believe too.
I'm so sorry. You just have good opinions. Okay, so yeah, Make Believe was well and truly the first major stinker in Weezer's discography. It does such a fantastic job at being consistently mediocre, and the more that I listen to this thing, the more I realize it has very little redeeming about it, and it's just this vapid mess of an album that is often just pure hell. Weezer essentially have a look at the aspects that made them likable in the 90s, the aspects that rose them to popularity, and they decided to throw that shit out the window and make an album that is just so soulless and clearly trying to pander to top 40 pop rock, something that they would end up doing on other pop markets for a while after this. You know, to be fair, it worked out for them because Beverly Hills is the band's most commercially successful single, and the album itself sold well, but at the cost of making quality music, as Make Believe has very little in terms of that. There's just so many things about Make Believe that make it such a hard album to stomach. For one, the production, which was handled by Rick Rubin. It's just way too clean and vapid. It's so limp. There's no life to the instrumentation. And whenever Weezer try and bust out their traditional heavy sound, it just sounds awful. It sounds overcompressed to shit, and I hate it. The instrumentation from the guys themselves is absolutely dead, and only a few moments are noteworthy. Aside from that, a lot of the same, like, formulaic song structures and sounds get very tiresome, especially after, like, the first 2 tracks. The synths that the band tried to incorporate on a few tracks here sound so dated and cheesy that hurts, and Weezer's knack for fantastic hooks and just catchy moments is just non-existent on here. Most of the choruses just feel so lazy and half-assed, and it's insulting to me, especially given how obnoxious some of them are. You know, the writing as well is incredibly dull, it's cliched, it feels like there was little to no heart put into some of it. Some of it is just absolutely corny and sickeningly sweet, often to the point where it's just so hard to listen to, and what the hell was Rivers Cuomo doing on We're All on Drugs? Like, what? Like, that song baffles me, honestly. Most of the songs in this album baffle me because they're just so soulless. They go in one ear and out the other, and they're just mind-numbing whenever they aren't terrible. And this was the first true signifier that Weezer were basically going to shit. So yeah, smelly album. Listen at your own risk.
Yeah, you put it well. This is where it all went downhill for Weezer. It's their first bad album, and boy is it bad. Not only is Make Believe an almost insufferably blatant collection of just radio rock pastiche, but that pastiche is also so out of place with Weezer's identity at that point that it just makes this project such a chore to listen to. This everything. I can list everything wrong with this album, but I'd be here all day. To keep it short, it's produced like ass, it's written like ass, it sounds like ass overall, and Weezer are clearly just trying to do something that's out of their comfort zone for absolutely no reason than to just, I don't know, make it on the charts. It's I don't know what else to say, but what has to happen to a man's psyche for him to go from releasing Say It Ain't So to Beverly Hills in just a decade?
Yeah. Oh. Well, I can shed some light on that. This album's whack as shit. Like, the instrumentation and music composition on a lot of these songs are usually considered amongst fans as some of the most subpar in their career, and I completely understand that. From the absence of an actual chorus on Perfect Situation, the absolute embarrassment of a riff on Beverly Hills, and just the overall dry and repressed tone that most of the track listing gives off. And this all generally has to do with how this album was made. In preparation for this album, Rivers Cuomo worked on this project that he called Unchained Melody, which was essentially his way of coming back to the melody first style that he used to use on earlier records like Blue and Pinkerton, as opposed to his recent, less melodic style. In his own words, he was craving that old school Weezer melody. This project was also filled to the brim with some of Rivers' darkest songs. They were not only melancholic in lyricism, but sound as well. But whenever Rivers would bring these demos to the band, he would almost always be met with mixed and sometimes extremely negative responses. So what ended up happening? Well, none of the songs Rivers made for Unchained Melody made it besides the acoustic turned piano ballad Haunt You Every Day. And what we got was the rest of Make Believe. This is what I think perfectly encapsulates Weezer's failure with this album. A lot of the lyrics on these songs are extremely melodramatic and carry a similar tone to the songs on Unchained Melody. But the instrumentals are either extremely clean or bafflingly lifeless. So whether or not people like that, it's unavoidable to not see the obviously jarring juxtaposition between the music and the lyrics. And I just think that this album could have turned out amazing if they had just used more, if not the entirety, of Unchained Melody.
All right. My favorite track on Make Believe is Perfect Situation, which I honestly think is a good track. The rest that I didn't like were We Are All on Drugs, My Best Friend, The Other Way, Freak Me Out, Beverly Hills, The Damage in Your Heart, Pardon Me, and Haunt You Every Day.
My favorite tracks on Make Believe. Well, my favorite track on Make Believe is also Perfect Situation. My least favorite tracks are Beverly Hills, We Are All on Drugs, My Best Friend, and Freak Me Out.
My favorite tracks are Haunt Me Every Day and Perfect Situation. My least favorite tracks are Beverly Hills, This Is Such a Pity, and pretty much the rest of this album. Fuck this shit.
Fuck this shit, indeed. At my number 13 spot, I chose Raditude.
My number 13 spot is the Black Album.
I chose Van Weezer.
Damn. Okay, so yeah, the 2000s was a bit of a shit show for the Weezer discography, to say the least. And while I don't think Raditude is the worst thing Weezer did in the 2000s, it's easily the cherry on top for bad Weezer albums, because it's just a moment where I think to myself, why did you guys do this? Like, what do you gain from this sort of pandering? Who the fuck is bumping tracks with titles like I Can't Stop Partying, In the Mall, I'm Your Daddy, and The Girl Got Hot? Like, who? Why? I mean, I suppose to give some credit where it's due, if you're wondering if I Want You To, I Want You To, and Put Me Back Together are actually alright tracks that are probably the few moments where it doesn't feel disingenuous and just bad. And Raditude is one of those albums that's so bad that's actually funny. Like, it's comically bad, and every time I tried to listen to this album, I just broke down laughing at tracks like I Can't Stop Partying. Like, the Lil Wayne verse, fuck me, dude. Like, outside of these things, though, Raditude is just pure garbage. A lot of the instrumentals on this album feel so boilerplate for Weezer. They do have a bit of a dancier and poppier approach, but they still feel incredibly average, even for some of Weezer's most mediocre albums. The synth leads they incorporate on some tracks here are tacky as shit and dated. River's songwriting is often very dumbed down, unsubstantive, and at times just laughably terrible. And some of Weezer's absolute worst songs are on this very album. The weirdest detour Weezer ever took stylistically on an album is on here with Love Is The Answer, which is a Hindi-inspired cut. Well, there's nothing wrong with doing this, but why did Weezer do it? Like I'd say it's fine if like someone serious tried to do it, but then Weezer did it. Why? It makes no sense to me. Now, I'm surprised that at the time Weezer fans had any goodwill left for the band after this album came out, and thankfully they progressed past this point with better music. But Raditude will remain a stain on Weezer's legacy, given how laughable a lot of it is. And it's clearly self-aware. Weezer pretty much embraced the corniness, but that embrace led to a comical moment in the Weezer canon.
I went with the Black Album, one of the band's more recent projects. I feel like this album tries to be a little more gritty, a little more cool, a little more, edgy than their previous few records, but ultimately it really fails horribly in all of those departments. It's easily one of the group's most flavorless, sterile, and just bland albums. There are very few moments on here worth even talking about. It's just an absolute fuckfest of just generic power pop that, in its sound doesn't really progress, what the band is about further. It doesn't, progress their sound. It doesn't, explore any new directions. It's just, I don't know, Weezer making power pop that's insanely uninspired. What else is new? It does have its moments, but I think those are few and far between, as a lot of this album is just weirdly forced edginess, and it just sounds out of character, and even then it's not really edgy. I think it tries to be, but it's maybe it's Weezer's definition of edgy, but overall it's very, very inoffensive.
I chose Van Weezer. So I'll start us by saying that this was totally not worth holding back this podcast for a year. Like, I'll just say that. But before I talk about this album, I feel like it's important to bring up the history behind this album. Namely, I'd like to talk about a quote from Rivers in 2019, where he describes this album as a super rock album, like the Blue Album, but more guitar riffs, which most likely implied this was supposed to be some sort of callback to her roots, as well as a glam rock tribute. When I finally got the chance to listen to this record, that statement couldn't have been further from the truth. It was a glam rock tribute for sure, and a lot of the songs on the album were once previously demos, but by the time they were Van Weezerfied, they sounded less like old Weezer with more riffs, and more like hollow corpses of old Weezer songs, with Crazy Train forcefully shoved into each one of them. And I would also like to add on an earlier part of the 2019 quote where he talks about Van Weezer right after discussing OK Human's Progress. The quote reads, "The other one, I'm depressed about thinking about it. I think I have this huge emotional block. It's called Van Weezer." So it kind of comes off that Rivers didn't even like this thing, at least at the time, which is bad. but aside that, the album itself without context is just whatever to me. Now, I'm not a hair metal enthusiast by any means, but I don't need to be the one to point this out, the idea that adapting these mostly mellow-sounding alt-rock and power pop demos with this incredibly flashy genre is a bad idea. Just like how I said Make Believe was a bunch of very depressed songs that were sanitized to create a fun summer album. Van Weezer is a bunch of classic-sounding Weezer songs that are pretty much completely fully formed and being mutated and forced and transformed into something they never were intended for. So a song like Ballad of the Briny loses much of its raw emotion that comes from its depressing lyrical concept because we're constantly being distracted by Crazy Train riffs or extremely clean production. This is a problem Weezer have been repeating constantly throughout their discography. But if they're gonna keep doing it, at the very least, don't fuck with the songs that are perfectly fine in the state that they're already in. Overall, this project is okay without context, but with the knowledge of how amazing most of those demos sounded before this album isn't a tribute, it's just an insult to Weezer's legacy.
Alright, my favourite tracks from Raditude are If You're Wondering If I Want You To, I Want You To, and Put Me Back Together. My least favourite tracks are Can't Stop Partying, In the Mall, The Girl Got Hot, Love Is the Answer, Let It All Hang Out, and I Don't Want to Let You Go. God, those song titles.
My favourite tracks on the Black Album are Can't Knock the Hustle and High as a Kite. My least favourite tracks are Zombie Bastards, I'm Just Being Honest, and A Prince Who Wanted Everything.
My favourite tracks off Van Weezer are Hero and Blue Dream, but honestly, I'd rather just listen to the original demo for Blue Dream. And my least favorite tracks are All of the Good Ones Are Gone, or it's called All the Good Ones. Sheila Can Do It, and One More Hit.
Alright, moving on to our number 12 picks. I chose Weezer's self-titled album, aka The Black Album.
My number 12 pick is Pacific Daydream.
Gratitude, baby!
Woo! Raditude! And fuck yes, lads. BDSM Weezer.
Yeah!
The Black Album. The Black Album, to me, is probably one of the band's more forgettable albums, in my opinion. And overall, I do think that it's pretty mediocre, hence why it's this low in my ranking. But honestly, I feel like this could have been so much better because the first 3 tracks on the album are fantastic and were incredibly promising to me. Like the opener, Can't Knock the Hustle, has this catchy 90s throwback vibe with some hip-hop influences, and it's a fun track. The one after that, Zombie Bastards, is squeaky clean, yes, but I like the acoustic reggae groove of the song, and it's genuinely catchy. And the cherry on top of this album's potential is High as a Kite, which is just such a gorgeous, euphoric, and moving song. It's honestly one of the best songs Weezer has ever made over the past 10 years, and I love it so much. I think it's incredible. Then after that, the Black Album just takes a huge fucking nosedive with some pop rock songs that are just so sterile, and as sterile as tracks on Make Believe were, and tracks that show ambition lyrically and what Weezer tried to do, but they just fall flat and are a complete mess. Like, what the hell is California Snow? I don't even know what the fuck they were trying to go for with that track, but it's so confusing. And it's not good at all. Byzantine is weird too. It's like the band's take on a tropical song, but it's like their only exposure to tropical music was like Kokomo by the Beach Boys. Then the rest, like I mentioned, is just incredibly sterile and soulless pop rock. You know, the lyrics have their fair share of cringe too, which is a given with a lot of Weezer albums, but the worst offenders are tracks like I'm Just Being Honest, Too Many Thoughts in My Head, and The Prince Who Wanted Everything. Fuck me, these songs are terrible. And like for an album that's titled The Black Album, it doesn't seem like a black album. Like when you think of Black Album, you think of albums that are dark in tone or have dark lyrics, and I think the best like example of like a perfect black album, well, it's not a perfect album, but it's a perfect example of one, Metallica's Black Album. That album is dark as hell. The lyrics are dark, music's dark, everything about it is dark. But not a lot of what is going on the Black Album is dark. Like, I don't know, it seems like it's not trying to go for that tone that a black album is meant to have. And it's just kind of taking me out of it, honestly. Yeah, so yeah, Black could have been so much better. It has some fantastic songs on it, but it falls flat on its face so hard that it breaks its face. It's not the absolute worst thing Weezer have ever made, obviously, but it could have been so much better than this.
Wait, which one did you pick again?
I chose
Gratitude.
Alright, sorry, I got mixed up. Yeah, I'll talk now. I went with Pacific Daydream. In a lot of ways, this album does seem like it was at least meant to be kind of a successor to the White Album by some stretch of the imagination. It definitely has a similar aesthetic and a similar atmosphere to it. Both are very, very summery. Except the summery feel is just really washed out and really squeaky clean on this project, to the point that it lacks any of the oomph, any of the quality, any of the musicianship, any of the just fun that made the White Album such a good album. I'll talk about that album a bit more later on, but Pacific Daydream is just really, really bland, and it sounds like the most radio-friendly summer rock hits that you could possibly conceive. There's certain parts of this project that are genuinely hard to sit through. It does have its highlights. It does have some tracks that almost live up to the White Album, but as a whole, this album is just a very low-effort project, and it really doesn't do anything to stand out in Weezer's discography, especially when the White Album exists, which is pretty much just what this album wanted to be, but better in every way possible.
Yeah, so this album is fucking hysterical. Unlike the previous albums on my rank list, despite this album being pretty inconsistent, it's definitely consistent in the amount of absurd musical and lyrical choices throughout the album. And there's the obvious ones that most people can point and laugh at, like the dated upon release party banger that is Can't Stop Partying, and the grungy rock tune that about a flat out stupid lyrical concept that is in the mall. But then there's the really whack shit like Love Is the Answer, specifically Hindi version, which I don't know, like if I just could just say like that's implying that there was a normal version of Love Is the Answer, and it decided to put the Hindi version on here for some reason. Its concept could bring a cool tribalistic and surreal sound, but it just ends up falling on its face in practice because the woman singing on it, the song's vocals, for some reason, sound like they've been compressed. Like I can hear the pixels. But besides that, if I'm gonna be honest, even with all of the dumb shit within this album, there are still some songs that I think aren't half bad. For example, the opening track on this record, while I can understand it might be a little too peppy for some, I think it works here because of how light the lyrics are on it. It's just a tale of two people unsure whether or not the other person wants them to, but they really want them to. Whoa! And it's refreshing to read lyrics that aren't extremely depressing for a change. Because even on Make Believe and Maladjoi, there were some pretty dark moments. But here, nah, just fun and talking about the fucking mall. But honestly, if I could go back and change it, I don't think I would. Because I feel like a part of history would be lost, good or bad.
All right. My favorite tracks off of the Black Album are Can't Knock the Hustle, Zombie Bastards, and High as a Kite. The worst tracks are Too Many Thoughts in My Head, The Prince Who Wanted Everything, Byzantine, and California Snow.
My favorite tracks on Pacific Daydream are Mexican Fender and Weekend Woman. My least favorite tracks are Beach Boys, Feels Like Summer, and Get Right.
My favorite tracks on Gratitude are If You're Wondering If I Want You To, I Want You To, and Put Me Back Together. My least favorite tracks are I Can't Stop Partying, Love Is the Answer, and In the Mall.
Moving on to our number 11 picks, I chose Weezer's self-titled album, aka The Red Album.
Oh my god, stop it, Mickey!
My number 11 pick.
I'm sorry, I just can't help
pick
but steal
is
your
the
picks.
Teal album.
What was that, Nostalgia?
Alright, Nostalgia, you can go last then.
Yeah, I chose the Teal album.
Yeah, I chose the Red Album too.
Ah yes, the Chad's Weezer album. The Red Album is quite the peculiar Weezer album, to say the least. It's one of Weezer's more out there and very odd albums. It's probably the oddest album in the Weezer discography, and that's all because they try to do so many things, oftentimes weird things, and oftentimes just what moments. Like, it's strange, but does that make Red a good album, though? No, it's pretty average, in all honesty. Like I mentioned, the Red Album is Weezer's weirdest album, and that's all because musically they try to do so many things on a lot of these tracks with different passages, and while some moments are certainly intriguing, oftentimes they just feel like an absolute mess and don't really form into anything enjoyable. One of these moments I'd like to mention is the song The Greatest Man That Ever Lived, which is basically a Frankenstein's monster equivalent of Bohemian Rhapsody. That's just like huge, epic, rock, gospel, pop, punk, spoken word song that just feels so nonsensical and entertainingly messy. Not to mention, there's just so many nonsensical sounds and effects thrown into this album, like the dated electronics, trap hi-hats, and just other weird noises. Rivers Cuomo raps on this album. Like, maybe it's all just in the name of good fun, but it's just so confusing. You know, what's also entertaining is the way, like, Rivers portrays himself in this album. Like, we already knew he was a Chad from the album cover, but Rivers' demeanor on this album is just really indulgent and Chad-like for some reason, and it's stupid, but funny stupid. It kind of gives this album personality, but it doesn't save the album from being a mess. The other band members get their chance to shine here too, which is cool, but none of them really did anything notable. Maybe Scott Schreiner for all the wrong reasons, but Brian Bell and Pat Wilson end up making pretty generic and forgettable songs. Despite this album being a mess, I actually do enjoy a few tracks from this thing. I will get to them in my best tracks, but the Red Album as a whole is an interesting album from the band in general, but it's a total mess. But a fun mess, I guess. It's mid, whatever.
I went with the Teal album. An album that, it's a weird one to talk about. Do Weezer completely butcher the covers on this album a lot of the time? No, they don't. But do they add anything new to a lot of these tracks? Absolutely not. And, just by reading the track listing here, you kind of can pretty accurately predict what this project would sound like for the most part. There's nothing really unpredictable. There's nothing exciting. There's a few tracks that stand out both negatively and positively. I'll briefly go over those. Positively, I think Weezer's sound really suits Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I think that cover is particularly good. And I also really appreciate the No Scrubs cover. It's definitely the most unexpected one on this project, and while in execution it wasn't perfect, obviously, it still, was quite entertaining to hear Rivers Cuomo sing it. When it comes to the negatives, the Paranoid and Billie Jean covers are absolutely awful, and I wish they were never made. I have nothing really else to add. It's a Weezer covers album. It's exactly what you'd expect from a Weezer's covers album. That's about it.
Yeehaw. God damn, this album's all over the place. I love it. When people say Ratitude was when Weezer started to completely stop giving a shit about consistency, I don't think they really considered how many ideas are jam-packed into this album. Hard rock, too cool for school bangers, such as Troublemaker, and the influenced to shit magnum opus, if you want to call it that. That is the greatest man that ever lived, and are present all over this album. And while the quality can vary for me, I would be lying if I said this album was boring. And honestly, while the off-the-wall nature that this album can lead to some less enjoyable Weezer songs, Cold Dark World, it does benefit tracks that are just written for the sake of dumb fun. The song Pork and Beans is a classic, not only for its extremely dated music video, but its feel-good lyricism and instrumental that evoke a feeling of childish rebelliousness. And I'd go as far as to say that this extends to tracks like Everybody Get Dangerous as well, because while the lyrics are stupid, they're dumb in a way that comes off as pretty intentional. The song is literally about Rivers, how Rivers would get together with some of his childhood friends and would just participate in the most ridiculously violent fights with each other because they had nothing else better to do. So yeah, not really a serious subject to begin with. So within this album while this album is overall inconsistent, it does have a couple of songs that are extremely fun to just jam out to, lyrics aside. Also, The Angel and the One is by far one of my favorite Weezer songs. Like, they could save Christian rock. I'm fucking telling you, man. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, let's move on to those favorite tracks. My favorite tracks from the Red album are Pork and Beans, The Angel and the One, which is one of the best Weezer closers ever. Yeah. And Heart Songs, the worst tracks are Cold Dark World, The Greatest Man That Ever Lived, Everybody Get Dangerous, Thought I Knew, and Automatic.
My favorite tracks on the Teal album are Everybody Wants to Rule the World and No Scrubs. My least favorite tracks are Paranoid and Billie Jean.
My favorite tracks on the Red album are The Angel and the One, Pork and Beans, and Everybody Get Dangerous. My least favorite tracks are Automatic, Troublemaker, and Cold Dark World. Fuck you, Scott Steiner.
Moving on to our number 10 picks, I'm going to go with the Teal album. Or should I say Weezer self-titled, aka the Teal album.
Yeah, I also chose the Teal album.
Nice.
I'll go last. I went with the Red album.
Alright. So a while before the Teal album came out, Weezer decided to cover the song Africa by Toto at the request of fans, and that song scored Weezer their highest charting song in a decade at that point. So I'd imagine they saw this and said, hey, why don't we capitalize off of the covers success and make a full-blown covers album? Which they proceeded to do. And here we are now with the Teal album, and it's nothing to write home about in the grander scheme of Weezer's discography. All of the songs are covers of very popular songs from different eras of music, and none of them really live up to the original material, obviously, and they're pretty faithful to the original, so Weezer don't exactly add a whole lot to the songs, and oftentimes sterilize some of them. Now, there's a few covers here that I actually do enjoy, which I will get into in best tracks, but there are plenty of covers on this thing that are pretty average, and at times just pretty bad, and I am looking at you, Billie Jean, and Paranoid in relation to bad. I do find it odd, but also a bit funny that they covered TLC's No Scrubs and it turned out good. Like, it's such a lame moment, but in an endearing way, and it kind of sums up this album. Sure, it's pretty average for what it is, but it's just Weezer, who are often touted as the best, lamest band of all time, embracing the lameness, and it's just a Weezer thing to do. Plus, it Actually, it's better than a handful of their studio originals, so take that as you will. Overall, it's fine for what it is. It's kind of funny, but there isn't really much of a reason for this album to exist outside of cheap marketing.
Okay, Mickey, nostalgia. You guys already know the deal. You already know what I'm going to do. But for the viewers at home, if anyone actually, by the way, Mickey, have you seen the No Country for Old Men between now and the time we last recorded this podcast?
I have not.
Come on, you've had like 2 weeks. Bro,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I've been busy.
All right, yeah.
I've been busy.
Right.
I've been watching
in the movie
movies.
No Country for Old Men. There's this cool dude. This pretty cool guy. He's named Anton, and in the movie he does this really wacky thing where he decides things by using a coin. So I'm basically going to do that with this album here. But instead of murdering one of you, I'm going to see if this album is good or not. So you ready? All right.
Yep.
Let's see what we get now. Oh, fuck, it's on the floor. Okay. All right. Yeah, Weezer's never been a good band. I've been lying this whole podcast. I hate all their records. Motherfuckers defend their first 2 albums. I say the critics were right when they panned Pinkerton. Fuck horny people. But now this album. This fucking piece of shit. Weezer decided to come out of the woodwork and tell me, "Oh, hey, Bill. Well, we ruined music. Oh, sorry. I would have been fine. Just fine if they kept making their own shit. But no, they had to cover these songs. You know, I love Mr. Blue Sky. It's one of those songs where no matter how many times I hear it in movie trailers or commercials, I can't hate it. But now, fuck Electric Light Orchestra. Weezer touched him. Toto, worst band I've ever heard. No Scrubs by TCL. Okay, still kind of fire, but it's because of principle. I'm gonna say it's shit. So, you know what? I've had it. I'm gonna beat the shit out of you, Rivers. I want time, place, and a playlist because we need to get that mood right. We're gonna fucking fight to the death. So overall,
Oh my god, can I watch?
yes, but overall, album's a 6, not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's your turn.
I forgot what I even picked at this. Oh, I went with the Red album. It's honestly not a bad album. I think this is kind of the point in my rankings where the albums like stop being quote unquote bad. They kind of become a lot more listenable and overall just a lot more enjoyable. And this album still kind of gets grouped in with Weezer's quote unquote bad albums. And out of all of those projects, I think Red Album is definitely the most listenable. Sure, it's got some horrible moments. Everybody Get Dangerous comes to mind. But while the overall sound of the album is, completely unmemorable when it comes to the rest of their discography, it does have some moments. Pork and Beans especially is fucking brilliant. And, it just, as a whole, this project doesn't really have any tracks that strike me as, awful. It's just got a load of, mediocre tracks. It's kind of like a good album to have in the middle of the rankings. I know it's more lower down the rankings, but it's just the most average Weezer have ever been on a studio album, in my opinion. And while it has its moments, it also definitely has some bad tracks. But overall, there's not a lot to say. Just Weezer playing it safe, being average. It's Weezer.
Okay, my favourite tracks from the Teal album are Africa, Take On Me, Mr. Blue Sky and No Scrubs. The worst tracks are Paranoid, Billie Jean, and Happy Together.
Shall I go next? Or?
Doing the same order
okay.
we talked about the albums.
My favorite tracks on the Teal album. Yeah, so that's not happening. My least favorite, all of them. So
My favorite tracks on the Red album are Pork and Beans and The Angel and the One. My least favorite tracks are Everybody Get Dangerous and Cold Dark World.
All right, we're moving on to our number 9 picks, and I chose Hurley.
I also chose Hurley.
I chose Black Album. Yeah, that's what I have.
All right. Yeah, first and foremost, I would like to make a quick public service announcement before I review Hurley. This is an important statement that I would like to get out. It's a serious issue that needs to be addressed, and I hope that with this in mind, I can get a conversation going and maybe turn some heads. So, stop hating on the Hurley album cover. It isn't that bad. What did Hurley ever do to you? He's just trying to live his life and smile, for fuck's sake. Leave Hurley alone. God, what
especially
did you do?
the teal, like the CD case cover on Spotify. Yeah, that's just flat.
Damn, leave him alone. Yeah, Hurley was kind of a reset moment for Weezer, as it feels like they realized that they fucked up with Raditude and wanted to prove that they could make some decent music once again. And Hurley is decent, and it has some fantastic highlights, but ultimately it's in the middle of my list, so there's a few things that drag it down for me. To start with the positives, the band returned to basics and tried to make some alt and pop rock akin to what they made on the Blue album, and it pans out well for them on some of the best tracks here, some of which are fantastic and fiery with some great production and catchy hooks. The songwriting on this album was very collaborative, so that led to some great moments. Rivers vocally sounds very passionate and fiery, and it seems like they got their shit together this time around. Hurley for sure has its great moments, but I feel like the album itself is front-loaded. All the tracks that I loved from this album were all on the front of the album, and after that it's just a bit inconsistent with some solid yet unmemorable tracks, but also some terrible ones. That's another thing. There's some terrible on this album, which I will get into in worse tracks. Rivers Cuomo, while, solid, is, excuse me, let me say that again. Rivers Cuomo, while solid vocally on Hurley, does have some rough moments that don't sound good, either because the mixing was pretty bad or because he didn't sound that great. And while Hurley is definitely a step in the right direction, it doesn't feel like the most consistent thing Weezer have made in the 2010s. With that in mind, though, Hurley's decent for what it is. It feels like a much-needed refresher given how mediocre the band's output was at this point since Make Believe, and it has some fantastic tracks to its name.
Yeah, I also went with Hurley, and, I think it's really damn underrated. Sure, it's far from flawless, but for an album released a mere year after Raditude, it's really surprisingly competent. It does have some serious blunders, which definitely do bring it down. But a lot of the tracks on here are just fun. They're very lively, very memorable, very just fun power pop tracks. I do also think that the production, while sometimes the very, very sloppy production does kind of add to the tracks, a lot of the time it does leave a lot to be desired. But overall, this project has more enjoyable tracks than unenjoyable tracks. And overall, I'd say it's an above average.
Yeah, I chose the Black Album. Real Dark Rivers, go off, King. I really like this album in concept. An album that mirrors the White Album by opposing that album's cheery vibes with a much more dark sound, lyrically and sonically. And that's what Rivers was making this album out to be. But when the first few singles for this album came out, the only dark part of the album, or the singles that I could, find, was that one bridge on what is probably Weezer's most optimistic song, High as a Kite. But whatever. It may have been, not what I was promised, but, maybe I could still like it for what it is. I like those singles, High as a Kite was and still is one of my favorite Weezer songs. So I was still really hyped to listen to this album. But after all of the singles were done playing on the album, like the flick of a switch, the album went from pretty good to painfully generic. This all starts with the track Piece of Cake, which is in fact sugary, but way too much for my taste. And the production on the song is a problem that kind of plagues all of the other tracks afterwards. My main problem with it is that it goes for this really clean sound, but at the same time it throws in these like overdriven guitars into the mix that just don't mesh well with that production at all sonically. But then it changes for Byzantine, which sounds like elevator music but subpar for that particular sound somehow. And then we have California Snow, which probably takes the cake for the dumbest Weezer intros ever, with Rivers quoting Teddy Roosevelt like he's Lil Wayne or some shit. And while I do think
That's such a good description. Oh my
and
god.
while I do think the low MIDI bass paired with the flashy high guitar notes is a cool musical idea, I just think the song in general is just okay. Overall, disappointing premise, exciting singles, and disappointing rest of the album.
Alright, my favourite tracks off of Hurley are Memories, Ruling Me, and Unspoken. My least favourite tracks are Where's My Sex, Smart Girls, and Time Flies.
My favourite tracks on Hurley are Memories, Ruling Me, Trainwrecks, Runaway, and Hang On. My least favourite tracks are Where's My Sex and Smart Girls.
My favorite tracks on the Black Album are High as a Kite, Living in LA, Can't Knock the Hustle, and Zombie Bastards. My least favorite tracks on the Black Album are Piece of Cake, The Prince Who Wanted Everything, and Too Many Thoughts in My Head.
Alright, moving on to our number 8 picks. I chose Van Weezer.
I'm yawning. I chose also Van Weezer.
I chose the Green Album.
Alright. You know, Van Weezer is the latest album in Weezer's discography. It literally came out 2 months ago after being delayed for so long. And was it worth the wait? Well, kinda and not really. Because Weezer's exploration into the world of 80s hard rock and glam metal nostalgia lends itself well to the band's signature alt-rock and power pop sound. And while it may have some genuine and endearing highlights, it has as many lows as you would expect a Weezer record to have. On multiple listens of this thing, it's actually pretty alright on its own, and while it doesn't have the power to stand out as one of Weezer's most standout albums, it's decent for what it is, and it has an incredibly solid first half. You know, Weezer of course embrace a lot of the influences that stem from the world of hard rock and glam metal, filled with virtuosic solos, flashy riffage, and soaring choruses, and like I said, the first half is fantastic in my opinion. It's just track after track of fun songs filled with guitar heroism and that fun Weezer feel, and I certainly have a fair amount of fun when listening to those specific tracks. I think the production is very solid and the guitar work is fantastic, and I think it's cool that Weezer broke into the Slayer-inspired thrash metal bits of One More Hit. But the album falters from the simple fact that it's pretty front-loaded, and all the best songs in the album are at the front. Then after that, Weezer pretty much break into some tracks that are pretty forgettable, half-baked, and feature some noticeably cringe-worthy moments. I mean, it's a Weezer album, that sort of thing is expected, but I digress. Some tracks are just very uninteresting in what they tried to do, with the melodies and the hooks can be a little weak too. And I actually kind of like Precious Metal Girl, but Weezer have definitely made better acoustic ballads before. Yeah. I mean, as a whole, it's a solid album that has some fantastic moments, but overall, it feels a little non-essential in the band's catalogue and pretty forgettable in the second half. And that second half is pretty detrimental to my enjoyment of the album. It's a nice album for what it is, it's pretty inoffensive for what it is, and like I said, it has its highlights.
Yeah, I also went with Van Weezer. I'll be the first to admit that there's plenty of valid reasons to dislike this album. First of all, it quite clearly wears its influences on its sleeves. It's not very original because of that fact, and oftentimes the songwriting is cheesy as all hell. But as much as I feel like I shouldn't enjoy this project, I still can't help but do. It's not great, not at all, but it's got its fair share of really just engaging, fun tracks. Oftentimes they're very, very catchy, quite mindless, but they still get the job done, and I don't think this album is trying to sell itself as something that it's not. It's quite clearly just one big ode to hair metal. It doesn't, try to do much beyond that, but, in that sphere of hair metal, it still manages to keep things fun without ever taking itself too seriously. I feel like if this project took itself more seriously, it would definitely not have been as enjoyable. And yeah, overall, I think it's inoffensive. I think it has some cringeworthy moments, but I still enjoy most of it.
I chose the Green Album. This album's alright. The album is definitely not as passionate or as raw as the two albums before it. But considering how later Weezer records would turn out, I think this album could have turned out a lot worse. My two favorites on this record would have to be Island in the Sun for its feel-good vibe and triad-focused guitar riff, and Hashpipe for its fun vocals and ridiculously stupid music video. And these aren't the only songs I like on this album, but the thing about the rest of these tracks is that they feel like they could be great, but they're held back by a severe lack of passion on this record. But I get it. This was the first album since Weezer's 3-year hiatus due to how Pinkerton was just received and many other things going on in Rivers' life at the time. So obviously they aren't going to take any bold chances with this album. This album was made for Weezer to become relevant again, and it worked. So because of that, I'd say this album definitely deserves praise in that regard. Because I don't know what I'd do if albums like Maladjoi or Hurley, Everything Will Be Alright in the End, and the White Album didn't exist. Also, side note, man, rest in peace, Mikey Welsh, the bassist during this era. He definitely didn't.
Yeah,
he definitely didn't deserve the little amount of time he got to be in the band during this era, because I definitely do think he had a similarly like fun and chaotic energy to Matt Sharp, but it was in his own way. He'd like light guitars on fire and shit like that. It was awesome, and probably could have made like the band quite interesting moving forward. However, at the very least, he got to play with the band 2 separate times before he eventually died in 2011. We hope you walk it down.
Yeah, rest in peace to Mikey Welsh. Alright, on that note, I think we'll just move on to best and worst tracks. My favourite tracks from Van Weezer are Hero, All the Good Ones, The End of the Game, I Need Some of That, and Beginning of the End. My least favourite tracks are Sheila Can Do It and She Needs Me.
My favourite tracks on Van Weezer are Hero, The End of the Game, I Need Some of That, Blue Dream, and Sheila Can Do It. My least favourite track is One More Hit.
My favourite tracks on the Green Album are Island in the Sun, Hashpipe, and I'll just say my least favourite song is Crab, but I don't even really especially hate that song. It just makes it a little boring.
Okay. And moving on to our number 7 picks, I chose Weezer's self-titled album, aka The Green Album.
I also chose The Green Album.
Let's see. I chose Hurley.
Alright. The Green Album. The only album to feature the late Mikey Welsh on bass, as well as being Weezer's shortest album at 28 minutes. It's one that a lot of people don't really seem to care for in relation to Weezer's discography. It's certainly nowhere near their best, and it does feel like a huge step down from Pinkerton and the Blue Album. And despite it growing off me a fair amount with re-listens, I still enjoy a fair amount of the material that was on here. And even with its clear issues, I still, took away a fair amount from it. Yes, this is basically Weezer playing it safe after Pinkerton flopped, and yes, it feels very lacking, especially at the end. But the highs in this album are just fantastic for me, and I honestly really like the production on this album. A problem with some of Weezer's albums is they're front-loaded, and with the Green Album that's very much the case, as my favourite songs are on the very front of the album. There's one highlight that's on the second half, but I will agree that the second half is very lacking, and it feels like Rivers is unenthused in terms of his delivery. He sounds like he's on autopilot for a handful of these songs, and some of the hooks don't really hit as hard. But honestly, a lot of the songs aren't even that bad, and ones that I feel like are half-arsed are carried by the instrumentals for me. I like them that much. The production is very much in that clean and punchy vibe that Blue went for, and while it definitely feels watered down as hell, I can't help but enjoy a lot of the instrumentals. The songwriting is definitely not very interesting at all on the Green album, and it doesn't have much that's very compelling. The closest we get to the compelling is probably Oh Girlfriend, but that's about it. I can excuse the lyrics on Hashpipe because that song is stupid fun and I don't care. Yeah, I don't have much else to say about the Green album, honestly. It's good for what it is. It's pleasant, but I cannot really say that it's all that interesting consistently. It's good, but not great.
After releasing the very emotional, very personal Pinkerton and getting completely slammed by critics, it took Rivers half a decade to release another album with Weezer, and the Green album, while still a good project, is devoid of a lot of the emotional potency of Pinkerton or even the Blue album, and it to me seems like Weezer making the safest album they possibly could at the time. In a way, this kind of seems like they're trying to make a sequel to the Blue album. You know, this was the second time they would self-title an album. At this point, it wasn't like a pattern or anything, so it did definitely seem like it was a sequel. But a lot of the stuff that made the Blue album so amazing is just completely out of the picture here. It's still a good album, but it's a hard one to listen to at times because it really does kind of mark the start of when Weezer would start playing it far too safe for their own good. Obviously, you know, this is very minuscule on this project. It's not at the, you know, it's not quite make-believe. It's not at that level, but it definitely is a very safe project, all things considered. And, you know, it definitely does it doesn't have as many memorable moments as albums like, you know, Pinkerton, Blue Album, even Maladjoi that came a year after, or was it a year after? I think it was a year after.
Yeah, it was a
it
year
just
after,
it just kind of sits at an awkward crossroad in the band's discography. It's good, but it does showcase some signs of maybe less so good things to come.
I chose Hurley, and I gotta say, this album is quite underrated, in my opinion. Aside from the obvious stinkers like Where's My Sex and my personal least favorite, Smart Girls, this album has some really killer tracks. Memories opens the album with Rivers' most abrasive vocal performance since Pinkerton, but instead of his vocals evoking anger or sadness, or he's shouting in a fit of nostalgia, a need for the good old days. This paired up with the overdriven lead part on the chorus makes for a kick-ass opening to the record. This kind of vocal style shows up a couple of other times on the record, like the song Trainwrecks, for example. But the thing that I love about this album that I don't think that gets brought up a lot or enough is how atmospheric this record can be sometimes. From the collage of strings that play at the beginning of Memories, to the choir and wedding bell combo at the start of Trainwrecks, this album had some sonically beautiful moments. But the songs that I think take the cake with this atmospheric sound would definitely have to be Runaway and Hang On. These two tracks have always been a call and response kind of deal for me. The initial call being Runaway, where Rivers Cuomo seems to be longing for for the person he's singing about to run away with him, to work against the notion that everything must change. But by the end of the song, it sounds like he's completely given up on that and has allowed himself and the person he's singing about stay separated, to live different lives, to have things change, to have the story end. But the response to this being Hang On is a last call of hope, telling Rivers and probably the audience as well to not be discouraged by the world and to not allow oneself to give up on things that they care about, to not allow the story to end. And that message is something that I think a lot of people need to hear, especially now. So, thanks, Weezer.
Okay. Moving on to best and worst tracks. My favorite tracks from the Green album are Island in the Sun, Hashpipe, Photograph, and Smile. My least favorite tracks are Simple Pages and Glorious Day.
My favorite tracks on the Green album are Don't Let Go, Photograph, Island in the Sun, and Simple Pages. My least favorite track is Oh Girlfriend.
My favorite tracks on Hurley are Runaway, Hang On, Memories, and Trainwrecks. My least favorite tracks are Where's My Sex and Smart Girls.
Alright, moving on to our number 6 picks. I chose Maladjoi.
My number 6 pick is also Maladjoi.
Dude, stop stealing my shit, come on. Bro, you can't keep doing this to me.
Cope
hey,
harder.
Don't you use the word cope in my presence. I will fucking fight you. I swear to God.
It's like it switched around. At the beginning it was me and Mickey who were twinning, but now it's you and Nostalgia. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I won't fight you though, because you're based. I will fight him though.
My pick was Okay Human. Right.
Okay. Maladjoi. Yeah, 2002's Maladjoi is one that's gained a bit of an underrated status in the Weezer fanbase. It's the first album that featured Scott Schreiner as the band's bassist, and while I don't think it's as great as some other Weezer albums, it's certainly one of the band's best and most overlooked records. A lot of what Weezer does on A lot of what Weezer do on Maladjoi wasn't very dissimilar from the other albums they released up to this point, but I feel like the best comparison to one of their albums I could make with Maladjoi is Pinkerton, actually. The sound of this album definitely carries over a lot of the melancholy and nastier sounds that they explored on Pinkerton, but here it feels a little bit more refined, but without losing the heaviness and the grit that album had. Sure, Rivers isn't really writing a lot of noteworthy, personal, or out there lyrics like he was on Pinkerton, but he and the band do very well at creating a generally heavy and catchy album with some great riffs, catchy choruses, solid vocals, and tracks that I think stand out as some of Weezer's best songs. The vocals and melodies and hooks are definitely much more captivating than most of Weezer's discography, and the first half of the album is genuinely banger after banger. But the main issue I have with Maladjoi is more or less a similar issue that I have with plenty of post-Pinkerton Weezer albums, and that's the fact that it's front-loaded. There's no bad track in the album in my opinion, but the second half of the album is very uninteresting. Weezer are clearly running out of ideas and don't really do much to break the monotony of the formula they attempt to use in this album. None of those are as compelling as the first 7 tracks, and it's a shame that they weren't able to keep up a consistent momentum, as this honestly could have been great and much higher on my list. But for now, I take Maladjoi for what it is. It's good, heavy, and catchy. It has some fantastic songs under its name, and I don't think that you should let it go under your radar or let it get overlooked because Blue and Pinkerton exist. So yeah, all in all, Maladjoi is good.
I agree. Maladjoi is very good. I often kind of tend to put the Green Album and Maladjoi together. They were released not long apart, and they are quite similar sounding, but Maladjoi, without a doubt, is for me the better album. Instrumentally, it's a little bit more gritty than the super squeaky Green Album. The guitars here have a little more noise, a little more feedback, and the riffs here are a little more exciting and more in your face. And you know, overall, this project has some like top tier Weezer tracks. Dope Nose and Burnt Jam are 2 absolute highlights for me, but there's others that I'll get to in the end. It really, I think, is the point in these rankings where every album here is very good or above. You know, it's not a defining moment in the band's career, but it's just a really solid, really fun record from start to finish. It sounds like the band had a blast making this. It definitely, you know, bleeds through the music, and it's definitely rubs off onto the listener. It's an absolutely great album with some quality tracks. It's just a fun time. I really, really think it's an underrated one in the band's discography. I think it deserves a little more attention than it tends to get. It tends to be quite overlooked.
Also, Nostalgia, the reason why they sound similar is that they were recorded in the same recording session. So, yeah, that's why they sound very similar.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like they took all the squeaky clean tracks and put it on the Green Album, and then they the more out there tracks they decided to put on.
That was what they were doing. Yeah.
They recorded like 60 songs during those sessions.
Yeah. 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 So, Okay Human. I really like this album, but the thing is that like I'm just really like just like sad because like knowing Weezer, I know that they're not gonna like try this sound again because they never stay consistent to anything. So, but for what this album is, I would say it's a very, very good. It uses its use of traditional, string arrangements very well. Uh, the way that the way that it's the string arrangements are used, at least in the way that I like, is that I like how the lyrical concepts on this record complement the instrumentals because the lyrics, as everyone knows, are like a little bit more, I guess, primitive-ist, or I mean, I guess in the sense that like kind of like just asking you like to think a little bit more about like if using like technology as much as we do is like a bad thing, and which is a fair thing to ask. And despite if you agree or not, I think the traditionalist sound of using like strings and orchestral music, which is usually associated with like the past and stuff like that, to like to complement this like like I wouldn't really want to say like backwards, but like this like it's the technology is definitely something forward. But it's like like nostalgic kind of like lyrical concept that like it feels like it's it's complementing like that by being the sound of that time. So yeah, I would definitely say it's smart in that regard. There's also just plenty of moments on the record where Rivers Cuomo is just like vocals just like kind of like mix super well with the instrumentals. Like Numbers and Dead Roses are fucking beautiful songs, just like with the way that like he just seems to like float on the tracks. It's honestly some of my favorite stuff from him vocally. But yeah, overall just a solid record, and I really want them to do this again, but I know they're not going to.
I would love them to do it again, but yeah, just knowing they definitely won't do it again. So yeah, with that in mind, my favourite tracks off of Maladjoi are American Gigolo, Keep Fishin', Take Control, Death and Destruction, Slob, Dope Nose, and Burnt Jam. My least favourite track is Possibilities.
My favourite tracks on Maladjoi are Dope Nose, Keep Fishin', Take Control, Slob, Burnt Jam, Space Rock, and Slave. My least favourite tracks are Fall Together and Possibilities. My
favorite tracks on OK Human are Numbers, Dead Roses, and Screens. My least favorite track is Here Comes the Rain, but that song isn't bad in my opinion. I just think it's a little boring compared to the other ones.
Alright, and we're moving into the top 5, the cream of the crop of Weezer's discography. And my number 5 pick, I chose Everything Will Be Alright in the End.
I also chose Everything Will Be Alright in the End.
Okay, we're gonna have to throw hands here. Come on, you can't keep doing this to me.
Inhale opium.
You guys need to join. You guys need to join me and Rivers in the wrestling match. We're gonna go four man battle. Yeah.
Hell yeah!
Fight to the death. I chose Maladjoi, by the way, for my 5th pick. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Everything Will Be Alright in the End is Weezer kind of continuing on their back-to-basics sound they explored on Hurley, and in contrast with that, Everything Will Be Alright in the End is much more refined, and as a whole, it's a very good album. Moments throughout this album definitely feel they definitely seem to take a little bit of influence from glam rock in some cases, but generally speaking, this album definitively feels like a Weezer project with lots of tracks that have that youthful energy, potent lyrics, and fantastic performances that made a lot of their early work great. And that results in plenty of amazing highlights throughout its duration. Production-wise, Everything Will Be Alright in the End sounds really great. The guitar work is very catchy and the riffs sound great. The anthemic solos are often great whenever they appear, and these songs at the core are great given how catchy and hooky they are. And Rivers Cuomo is penning some of Weezer's best writing and delivering some fantastic performances. Weezer even got a little ambitious with the Future Scope trilogy, which is this 3-part musical piece akin to an epic rock opera, and it's genuinely an amazing moment for Weezer and is one of my favourite things that Weezer have ever made. Weezer also show a sense of self-awareness to their career up at this point. They've touched on stuff like in the past they've, sorry, let me say that again. Weezer also show a sense of self-awareness to their career up to this point. They've touched on stuff like this in the past, but on here it's much more truthful, especially with tracks like Back to the Shack, Eulogy for a Rock Band, and Had It Up to Here. It's interesting to see the band's perspective, and outside of that, we get some great and well-written pop rock tracks. Sorry, I've been drinking tonight, so don't mind me. None of this album tries to be sterile or pander like Make Believe or Raditude. It feels like a genuine album that stays true and blue to the sound that made Weezer popular in the 90s, while also just feeling a little updated for its time. Maybe not as great, but a little updated. And as a result, we get something that sounds great, well written, and of course, it makes it one of the band's best albums, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you said. This is where the albums start getting good again in Weezer's discography. Everything Will Be Alright in the End is an absolute return to greatness for the band after a long period of albums ranging from awful to just okay. This album is symphonic, it's fresh, it's exciting. Instrumentally, it's so much more busy and interesting than their previous batch of records. It really seems like attention to detail was given to this project unlike anything they have released in a long time. It's also, and perhaps most importantly, very well written. Something that you can't really say about a lot of Weezer albums, in the mid to late portion of their career. That being said, it's definitely not perfect. I think they definitely have better releases, but I think this project overall is it's great. There's very few uneventful moments, and it's a massive pick-me-up in the band's discography. Long gone is the sheer unfiltered cringe of trying to listen to Raditude or Make Believe. This album is top tier Weezer.
I chose Maladjoi, and when I said that the Green Album had a lot of songs that I thought could be better, this album is what I was talking about. A lot of these songs were recorded during the same time as Green, but on this record, instead of them being pretty clean and less abrasive, we have distortion for days on this record. But what makes this album different from Weezer's previous records is that while it has that traditionally distorted but fun Weezer sound, it still can be just as peppy as the Green Album, but at the same time, just as melancholic as Pinkerton. You can have songs like Keep Fishing and Dope Nose that are pretty upbeat, but then you'll get songs like Slave and a song that is literally titled Death and Destruction that sound like the world is ending. But it's not just another Pinkerton when it's like this. The album feels less like the world is currently on fire, like how Pinkerton feels especially during its especially hectic moments. It more so feels like Rivers has been dealing with this kind of stuff for a while now, and so that's why he seems more repressed on these songs than usual. And as a side note, I really love how experimental this album can get, mainly on songs like Burnt Jam, which is literally just reggae rock, and I love that. But overall, I think this album is heavily underrated for how it improved on the mistakes of the Green Album and how it introduces a lot of new kinds of sounds for Weezer at that point in time.
My favourite tracks from Everything Will Be Alright in the End are Back to the Shack, Eulogy for a Rock Band, I've Had It Up to Here, Da Vinci, Go Away, Foolish Father, and the Future Scope Trilogy. My least favourite tracks are Cleopatra and The British Are Coming.
My favourite tracks on Everything Will Be Alright in the End are Ain't Got No Body, Back to the Shack, Eulogy of a Rock Band, I've Had It Up to Here, The British Are Coming, Da Vinci, Go Away, Foolish Father, Anonymous, and Return to Ithaca. My least favourite track is Lonely Girl.
My favorite tracks on Maladjoi would have to be Burnt Jam, Keep Fishing, Dope Nose, and probably Death and Destruction. And my least favorite track would probably have to be Space. Probably a Space song, yeah.
Okay. Moving on to our number 4 picks, I chose OK Human.
I chose the White Album.
Oh wait, I meant Space Rock, not Space Song. I don't know.
It's fine.
Yeah, but yeah, I for that pick, I chose Everything Will Be Alright in the End.
Okay. OK Human is very new, of course. It came out back in January, and since I reviewed it and listened to it more, I've been with the sentiment that this is one of Weezer's absolute best albums, and 7 months later, I still stand by that. But the more that I listen to the album, the more that I grow to love it. Now, it's definitely Weezer's most unique album, as the band end up dabbling into completely different territories with a take on Baroque pop and chamber pop, all backed by a 38-piece orchestra. Fundamentally, a lot of these tracks still feel like Weezer at the core, but packaged in a more orchestral setting, and to me it's great and one of Weezer's most mature and finest statements to date. The production on OK Human is fantastic. It manages to maintain the catchy energy we saw present on previous Weezer albums while also feeling very vibrant and nuanced. I love the string arrangements throughout this album. I love how the drums are mixed too. The tracks themselves feel eclectic in what they try to do, and there isn't a moment on the album that feels half-baked or uninspired. It feels complete, and that completion is even emphasized by how smoothly the songs transition from one another. The album's mood has this very melancholic tone to it, but it keeps the catchy and fun parts that you'd expect to find on a new Weezer album, and the hooks especially are key, since most of them are absolutely fantastic and even breathtaking at times in how fantastic they are. The lyrics are some of the best in Weezer's catalogue too. Sure, some moments may be a little corny, and I could definitely see why people would be turned off by Screens or even Alu Gobi, but I like that. And I feel like that's part of Weezer's appeal, especially when songs like is Surf Wax America like a great song because of the lyrics? No, of course not. It's just a fun fucking song. And even if you take the lyrics out of context with OK Human, I think the songs are just fun. Rivers on this album is writing some of Weezer's most potent songs since Pinkerton, in my opinion, and that's reflected by a lot of the songs that delve into personal moments like the aforementioned Screens, All My Favorite Songs, Mirror Image, Numbers on Bird with a Broken Wing, and there's songs on this thing that have this kind of charm and silly moment to them, like Alu Gobi and Playing My Piano. Well, the writing is consistently quality, and I like the themes that Rivers touches on based around technology and quarantine life. It's potent, it's written well, with that Rivers Cuomo's charm. I suppose the last leg of the album isn't as strong as the rest, granted the songs are still pretty good, but ultimately they aren't as fantastic or reach the incredible heights that the rest of the tracks on the album do. With that in mind though, I love OK Human. I think it's a fantastic album for sure, and it has some of Weezer's best songs under its name. And yeah, I love the production, I love the lyrics, the performances, and Weezer's attempt at a Baroque pop and chamber pop sound is great, and it gets better for me with every listen.
I went with the White Album. This album is just an absolute blast. When it first came out, a lot of people were comparing it to their first two albums, and well, I think it's quite a stretch. It definitely is a breath of fresh air and a discography that, at the point of its release, was quite tricky to be optimistic about. Sure, their previous record was great, but at this point in Weezer's career, everyone probably just assumed that was a fluke. But no, they did two great albums back to back. The White Album is just unfiltered fun. The songs here are all really fun, summery, instrumentally very vibrant, and lyrically just catchy and infectious. The whole sound of this album is just tied very well, and tracks like California Kids or LA Girls are among the best the band have ever released. It's a really, really solid power pop record from start to finish, and I think Weezer really, played to their strengths while still, exploring something new with this very summery, very breezy direction. It's a great record through and through.
So yeah, Everything Will Be Alright in the End. I'll start us off by saying that this was actually the first Weezer album I listened to. Which is weird because this album, this was the album that they made to tell the fans that they were back on their side again. But despite that, I'm glad I started with this record because I don't think I'd appreciate it as much as if I didn't. For for a comeback album, this is a great achievement on the band's part because not only does this album go back to their usual sound, it also adds new musical ideas and influences to make the album more interesting. A song that I think does this the best would have to be "I Had It Up to Here." Well, the main detail that people bring up for that song is its lyrical content and how it was the most direct Rivers had been about Weezer's relationship with their fans up until that point, and honestly is still the most direct he has been since then. There's still a lot more to this song than that. The first being that addicting opening strumming pattern that I could honestly play for an hour straight and wouldn't get bored of. The vocals from Rivers, which easily has to be one of my favorite vocal performances from him, and that heavily Queen-inspired bridge section that triumphantly leads into the song's guitar solo. Songs like this show that Weezer could be inventive with their music while pleasing the fans at the same time. People don't just want Weezer to go completely back to basics and just make the same records over and over again. But they do want Weezer to stick to genres and styles that fit their sound. Songs like Foolish Father, Cleopatra, and especially the 3-act closer on the album show that if Weezer didn't like on the album, like if they didn't take a risk and tried something new, they wouldn't exist. Weezer's constant need to change and evolve is what makes them interesting to me. But I think that they could definitely learn a lesson of how to go about that change by looking back at this album and by looking back at the big one after it.
All right. My favorite tracks from OK Human are all my favorite songs. I will never forgive AJR for ruining that song. Alu Gobi, Grapes of Wrath, Numbers, Playing My Piano, Mirror Image, Screens, and Bird with a Broken Wing. My least favorite track is Dead Roses.
My favorite tracks on the White Album are California Girls, Wind in Our Sails, Thank God for Girls, Do You Want to Get High, King of the World, Summer Lane and Drunk Dory, LA Girls, Jacked Up, and Endless Bummer. My least favorite track is Girl, We Got a Good Thing.
My favorite tracks on Everything Will Be Alright in the End are I've Had It Up to Here, Cleopatra, Foolish Father, and the Future Scope trilogy, specifically the second act titled Anonymous. And my least favorite tracks are Lonely Girl and Go Away.
All right, we're moving to the top 3 now. And at my number 3 pick, I chose Pinkerton.
Whoa!
No.
Yeah.
No.
Lies.
Get out of here.
No lies here. I chose Pinkerton at my number 3 pick.
I'm gonna kill you before the wrestling match.
You're gonna fucking assassinate me. You're gonna John Wick me.
Yeah, I'm gonna John Wick you.
Is it 3? Yeah, my number 3 pick is OK Human.
My number 3 pick is The White Album.
Okay. Weezer's sophomore album was a bit of a complicated one when it came out, as a lot of people were very much turned off by the way that this album sounded. A lot of people hated the lyrics. It did poorly numbers-wise when compared to Blue, and it practically damaged Rivers Cuomo's mental health after this, so much so that he regretted Pinkerton and felt embarrassed by it. But since then, Pinkerton has gotten a huge critical reevaluation and is now a fan favourite album in the Weezer discography, and that's pretty much easy to see why that's the case, because it's a very bold, raw, and emotionally honest album from Weezer that I think is fantastic. You know, in comparison with the clean and punchy sound of the Blue album, Pinkerton is much more rough around the edges and raw. It gives off an aesthetic that is incredibly dark and angsty, which does suit the lyrics of the album. And while it definitely And while this sound definitely gives Pinkerton a unique tone in Weezer's discography, it isn't really that different from the Blue album when you think about it. It's fundamentally the same in its structure, they're both very catchy and have brilliant hooks, the musicianship is the same, the soloing is more twisted but crucial to the formula of the album, and it carries over that nerdy Weezer personality, but more so in a dark setting. I love the instrumentals on this album, they maintain that catchy aspect of Weezer's sound, but in a more raw setting, which allows that sound to go the extra mile and feel more heavy. I think there's some great riffage on here, and the melodies are incredibly catchy and complimentary of Rivers' performances. Of course, the main talking point of the album is Rivers himself, and that's mainly because the guy is spilling his guts over so much in this album, and is clearly shown to be in an emotional distress, all because of the sudden fame that the band received from Blue. The lyrics throughout are as questionable as some may be, are incredibly honest, raw, emotionally potent, and very personal. And I totally respect the hell out of Rivers for being all those things on this album. Throughout the album it's incredibly dark, giving off a sense of helplessness and tiredness. He's depraved and unwell throughout this album, and the messiness of the album's sound works so well with what Rivers is doing, and it genuinely makes for some of the most potent songs ever written in the 1990s. It's a compelling listen to me, and I definitely didn't get it the first few times that I heard it, but as I listen to it more, the more I appreciate and enjoy it for what it represents for Weezer and Rivers Cuomo. The sound and lyricism is enough to make this one of Weezer's best albums, which it certainly is. There's a couple of tracks on this album, though, that I just straight up don't like. I don't like El Scorcho or Across the Sea. Across the Sea is just creepy as shit, and I cannot stand it, and El Scorcho is just too unbearably awkward and messy for me to enjoy.
Lame.
Besides all that, though, no, don't boo me. Why are you booing me? I'm right.
No.
Besides all of that,
is
you're
one
wrong.
of the best songs.
You don't get the quote.
No, it's not.
Lyrics.
It's one of their
It is,
overrated songs.
No.
You just
Boo, no.
you're just being a prune, Mickey. You're just being a prune.
I'm not being a prune. I just don't like how creepy that song is.
It's not fucking creepy, man.
It is creepy.
Everyone has done that. He's just brave, and he was just the only one who was brave enough to write a song about it.
Facts,
I mean, fair, I guess, but I still don't like it. Okay? God. Besides all of that, though, there's much more to love about this album. It's a great album, one of Weezer's best albums. There's just a few more that I prefer.
I went with OK Human. In my opinion, this is one of the band's most satisfying records ever released. I know that it's fresh in my mind. It was only released this year, but I still consider it to be this high up the band's rankings. The chamber pop style that they present here is surprisingly well executed. The songs all over this thing are incredibly pleasant, they're charming, they're very intimate, and the whole album just feels like a very interesting and welcome new direction for the band, and an absolute return to form after, again, what is probably the band's fifth period of just releasing bad albums. I don't know. It feels like the band have had 5 different returns to form. But this project definitely stands out as one of the band's best. It's definitely the band's most mature album in a long time. I think Rivers' songwriting is at its most intimate and personal here. Well, not in his total discography, but more intimate and personal than it has been in years. He really does showcase a side of him that was definitely pleasant on moments throughout his discography, but wasn't this present on an album since maybe even Pinkerton. It's got an absolute just really consistent track listing. There's so many standout tracks. It's really, really hard to pick a least favorite track. It's so consistent. It's interesting. The instrumentals are vibrant. It's just Weezer stepping out of their comfort zone and for once doing something really well and executing something really, really well.
My pick is the White Album, and I would just like to say that I hope Weezer were proud when they made this record. Weezer came back with their more traditional sound from How Everything Will Be Arandian, but expanded on it even further. But, this time they went for, more beachy and more oceanic tone, which I feel like creates a very comfortable and just relaxing kind of vibe, more so than everything will be alright in the end. Songs like and this works really well for songs like California Kids, because and like Girl We Got a Good Thing, because a lot of the lyrics on these tracks, aside from some, are very optimistic for the most part, and they're just like generally like feel good. And I feel like that kind of lyrical concept fits really well with the instrumentals here. But that doesn't stop this album from being able to get a little bit like emotional at points, because there's like, I mean, I wouldn't really say it's like sad in like some places, but there's like moments on some songs like Summerlin and Drunken Dory where just like like at the bridge part, or like like the very freak out section on the Girl We Got a Good Thing. It still definitely knows how to get somewhat dark, which is kind of embarrassing because those sections are darker than anything on the Black Album, which is just go further to show how stupid that record is. But overall, just great achievement in their discography, and they should feel extremely proud. Very comfy.
All right. My favorite tracks on Pinkerton are Tired of Sex, Get You, No Other One, The Good Life, Pink Triangle, Falling for You, and Butterfly. My least favorite tracks are Across the Sea and El Scorcho.
My favorite tracks on OK Human are All My Favorite Songs, Alugobi, Grapes of Wrath, Numbers, Playing My Piano, Mirror Image, Bird with a Broken Wing, and Here Comes the Rain. My least favorite track, if I had to pick, was Dead Roses.
My favorite tracks off the White Album are California Kids, When There Are Sales, Thank God for Girls, LA Girls, Girl We Got a Good Thing. And my least favorite tracks are Jacked Up and Endless Bummer.
Moving on to our number 2 picks, I chose Weezer's self-titled album, aka The White Album.
Oh, wow.
My number 2 pick... My number 2 pick is also a self-titled album, and it's the Blue Album.
My number 2 pick is also a self-titled album, and it's called The Blue Album. It's a place away, Mickey. It's a place away.
I know. Don't do this to me. Shit. Okay, I gotta talk about... Yes, I just put the White Album above Pinkerton. Do I care, though? Not really, because I went with my gut on this one, and it told me that I well and truly love the White Album so much, to the point that I considered putting it at the top. But we're here now. I well and truly stand by what I just put it, where I placed it. I think the White Album is amazing and is easily a contender for one of Weezer's best albums. The White Album is not that different from a handful of Weezer albums, as the band just stick to their guns and attempt to create some catchy and fun pop rock and alternative rock songs. The White Album in particular feels like a callback to the sound of the Blue Album, while also taking influences from Californian culture, beach culture, and even taking some inspiration from the sweet sunshine pop melodies akin to bands like the Beach Boys. This ends up culminating into the perfect soundtrack for the summer and one of the best Weezer albums. And the more that I listen to this thing, the more that I just love it and can't get enough of it. From the album's opening to the very finish, it's just Weezer doing what they do best, and that's making some incredibly fun and gratifying pop rock songs. And it's an album that I just can't help but smile my way through because it's that great to me. And the songs themselves are just fantastic, from the instrumentals to the lyrics. The punchy production on this album is fantastic. I love the way that Patrick Wilson's drums are mixed on this album. They feel so upfront and add to the punch of the sound. The riffage is confident and gratifying. The solos are anthemic and soaring. And the prominence of pianos on a lot of these tracks is a very nice touch and sort of adds the summery feel of the album. Excuse me. Rivers Cuomo is fantastic on this album with the choruses. They're so fun. There's so many anthemic ones. They're very passionate. And the soaring choruses especially are just so gratifying and fun. Rivers vocally sounds great throughout this album, and he sounds like the exact same guy that we heard on in the 90s. And there's some brilliant songwriting on this album that has some of his at times most absurd and sometimes dark and introspective. Best songwriting is easily on tracks like California Kids, Girl You Got a Good Thing, King of the World, and Jacked Up. The songwriting doesn't even need to be amazing for some of these tracks, as they just work especially well when we take into consideration tracks like Wind in Our Sail, Thank God for Girls, and LA Girls, although I will admit LA Girls is pretty patronizing, even though I love that song. The album has a formula and it sticks to it, but the formula works for the band on every track on this album, and it's incredibly consistent. It's consistently gratifying, it's consistently fun and catchy, and it's something that I feel like will get better with time and grow on me more and more. It's easily the best thing that the band have done post Pinkerton, and I think it stands up to the quality of the best albums that get overshadowed in Weezer's discography.
I went with their debut, the Blue Album. It may only be second on my rankings, but that doesn't mean I don't adore this project. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's easily one of the best alternative rock albums of all time. And it's one that definitely stands out in the genre, especially at the time. If you look at the early 90s, a lot of the big alternative rock bands were, kind of just rough around the edges. If you look at Kurt Cobain, Billy Joe Armstrong, all of these like frontmen were like quote unquote cool. And then you look at Rivers Cuomo and company, and they're in a lot of ways the antithesis of what the genre was. They are very uncool. They're very average. But I think that's what, makes a lot of these songs so sincere, and what makes a lot of these songs connect to me so much. Weezer are one of the most sincere and genuine bands of all time. They never they do try to be cool, but even when they try to be cool, it's so clearly uncool that it does kind of make it hard for me to like really personally hate any Weezer project. They're not a cool band. This isn't a quote unquote cool album, but I think that's what makes it so cool. It stands out. It's unique. It's so personal. It's so earnest. It's honest about, its emotions, its struggles, its its joys. It's just a very, incredible record. Not to mention, the musicianship on here is just fantastic. Not something you'd expect from a band that you see on the cover. The songwriting is at times a bit dorky, but it's very, very fantastic and very, very poignant at times, very heartfelt. It's got some of the most iconic alternative rock tracks of all time. Buddy Holly, Undone, Say It Ain't So. These are all classics, and even the deep cuts here are just equally as memorable, equally as awkwardly charismatic, equally as iconic. Through and through, it's one of the greatest albums ever made. It's one of my personal favorite albums, and it's an album that means a lot to me personally. And it feels weird putting it at 2, but there's just one album that I adore that much more.
Also chose the Blue Album, and honestly, what can I say about this album that hasn't already been said? Like, this album is filled to the brim with catchy hooks, sweet melodies, and awesome guitar riffs. This album has taught me so much about how to write music and even play music, and a large part of my early guitar practice was just learning songs from this album. My Name is Jonas has a great use of dynamics with how it starts off with an endearing, low-key acoustic section from the ex-member Jonas Cropper, which, fun fact, actually got to play this song with Weezer a couple of times years later, and then transitions into this roaring power chord heavy riff, which perfectly sets up the album by showing in its first few seconds that it can be sweet and comfy, but at the same time loud and distorted. No One Else is a little bit more low-key compared to My Name is Jonas, but it still carries that sick, distorted guitar tone. This is also the first mention of girl troubles in this album in this album's lyrics. But unlike other Weezer songs, this one isn't from the perspective of Rivers, and rather it's kind of like a character who is overly controlling and sexist to his girlfriend. This character is expected to this character is usually suspected to be elaborated on further on the most melancholic song on the whole album, the world has turned and left me here. To me, everything on this song is fucking perfect, from the somewhat hopeful acoustic at the beginning of the song to the inverted sounding guitars on the verses of the song. The lyrics are also extremely relatable, as they are heartbreaking with how it paints the picture that the character just wanted to feel affection, but this very need for that affection is what pushed away what he truly cared about. It's one thing to love someone who makes you happy. It's another to do the same for that person. And then right after, we got the classic power pop bop titled Buddy Holly, which is ridiculously fun. I don't need to say anything else about that song. It's a classic. Undone, a Sweater Song, is one of the many songs in this record that is just plain nerdy in concept. Like you got people and like surfer bros like with like voices saying shit like, this band is so rad and I'm so glad we got to get the band back together and shit like that. It's real cheesy, but it's in a good way and it's quite comedic. And speaking of nerd concepts, Surf Wax America is that at its finest. This song doesn't mean jack shit. Become a surfer. Sometimes I feel like in comparison to Pinkerton, people sometimes come off as thinking that the Blue Album is just sunshines and rainbows, but songs like Saying Ain't So show that isn't entirely true. It's still wacky and nerdy like songs before it, but the lyrical content is extremely heartbreaking. Overall, this album is a staple of the alternative rock genre, and I don't know how I didn't already have it at 10 for so long. It's a masterpiece.
All right. My favorite tracks from the White Album are California Kids, Wind in Our Sail, Thank God for Girls, King of the World, LA Girls, Girl, We Got a Good Thing, Jacked Up, and Endless Bummer. My least favorite track is Do You Want to Get High?
My favorite tracks on the Blue Album are all of them. My least favorite tracks are none of them. Actually, no, I do have a least favorite. No one else. Never mind.
Yeah, same for me. All the tracks are my favorites, but no one else is. If I'd have to choose, like the weakest one, even though it's like a character, it's a.
I got a bit carried away there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. And we're moving on to our number one picks. And in my opinion, Weezer's best album is Weezer's self-titled album, aka the Blue Album.
My number one pick is Pinkerton.
Yeah. My number one pick is Pinkerton as well.
Alright. Weezer's 1994 debut album is, in my opinion, the best Weezer album. Who would have seen that coming? It's generally regarded as one of, if not the best album in Weezer's discography alongside Pinkerton, and I'm inclined to agree. There's a reason why this album brought Weezer to such incredible heights of popularity when it came out, and that reason is simply because the Blue Album is an amazing album that has some fantastic alternative rock and power pop songs. It has the personality, the fantastic tracks, and songwriting to back it up. It came out at the right moment in time given the popularity of alt-rock and the dying grunge movement, and Weezer came bursting in with a demeanor and a charm that was needed and well executed, and Weezer are always perceived as like this really nerdy band that doesn't really fit in, and that's who they appeal to, just like really nerdy kids that just don't really fit in. And I could definitely say I kind of fall into that demographic, which is kind of why I love this album. It just feels kind of relatable in that sense. One of the main places where Weezer thrives, where the Blue Album thrives the most to me, is in its sound and instrumentation. Sure, the heaviness and punchiness of the production isn't exactly the most groundbreaking thing ever. You know, grunge was a thing prior to Weezer. But goddamn, the production is absolutely stellar and has aged incredibly well. The guitars in this album are incredibly punchy and somewhat grungy. The band themselves show us that they are great at playing their respective instruments and with so many moments of iconic riffage. Fantastic, earwormy, and sweet guitar melodies, incredibly catchy and memorable moments, and, you know, some really great and memorable guitar solos. But what sells this album the most to me is the songwriting and Rivers Cuomo's nerdy personality. You know, Rivers Cuomo wrote about so many things throughout his career, but the Blue Album has some of the band's best writing, in my opinion. Sure, Pinkerton is very revealing and personal, but to me, the Blue Album's writing is just incredibly endearing, and I love it. Whether we're talking about the absurd and silly moments of writing on tracks like Buddy Holly and Surf Wax America, the tracks that depict difficulties with romance and love, like on Only in Dreams, or the devastatingly personal Say It Ain't So. And, you know, it's delivered with Rivers Cuomo's great and recognizable boyish vocals. There's only like one moment where it doesn't click with me. And even if we're not taking this into account when we talk about, you know, why this album is amazing, it's just a fun and catchy album that's just an absolute blast to listen to from front to back, and it's so goddamn infectious. The hooks are fantastic, the guitar work and anthemic solos are catchy, the songs themselves at the core are incredible, and the fact that that the track run from Buddy Holly to Say It Ain't So is on this very album is so unfair. I absolutely adore this album. It's fantastic from front to back. I love the endearing songwriting, I love the production, and it's easily one of the best alternative rock albums ever made. Easily one of the best alternative rock albums of the 90s, and all of this makes Blue Album my favorite Weezer album and what I think is their absolute best.
I went with their sophomore, Pinkerton. It's definitely a special album. It's always been my favorite Weezer album, and it's one that connects with me just a whole lot more than anything else the band has ever released. It connects to me a whole lot more than most albums I've ever heard. It's definitely one of my favorite albums of all time, and it's undoubtedly the band's most emotionally potent album. The Rivers we get in Pinkerton is emotional. He's frustrated, he's lost, and he's 100% honest and sincere about all of his emotions. And while I've always appreciated the lyrical themes of Pinkerton, and you know the weight of Rivers' emotional ramblings, it isn't the sole reason I love this project. I just think that as a whole, it's just got the most memorable, most well written, and also the most well performed set of songs out of every Weezer project ever. Tired of Sex, Across the Sea, The Good Life. All of these tracks are just perfect. They're just memorable. They're just beautiful. They're iconic. It has everything I could ever want in a alternative rock album. It's honestly just as good as all the material on the Blue Album. It's just a lot more dark, a lot more gritty, and definitely a lot more emotionally potent, in my opinion. I also just adore the atmosphere of this album, all the way down to the cover. It feels very cold and dark, but very comforting in a weird way. I cannot comprehend why this album was panned upon release. It's a perfect project, in my opinion. And I guess people just weren't quite ready to get, you know, this level of emotional transparency from the band that made, you know, the fun Buddy Holly song. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. Again, it's perfect.
I would like this because like the thing about this album for me is that it's like kind of like what Mickey was saying when he was talking about Pinkerton. This album is just as fun and like just as like well written musically as like the Blue Album, and like the only real difference in it sonically is that it's a little bit more inverted, but it's not so much to the point where I can get why people panned it, especially when there was like so many other like albums that came out like around the same time, like Green Day's Insomniac or Nirvana's In Utero, that were just as dark, if not darker, than this album sonically, and just as dark lyrically. So I feel like it's just that it just doesn't really make all that much sense that Weezer was panned for this. It just seems like a logical progression for them, especially considering Rivers Cuomo's mental state. But and just over like it's just This album is just like so fun, like musically. Tired of Sex is a great opener with like an amazing synth line that was initially in a demo actually done by some lead guitar parts, which sounds just as cool. Get You is a like honestly surprisingly honest song with where Rivers Cuomo admits that he was in the wrong in a situation because uh, the song's about how he was emotionally abusing someone he was in a relationship with, and that's bad. So I appreciate him for being honest with. It feels like he's finally like reached that point where he can live out the life that he wanted to, but he's just inevitably brought back to the real world, kind of like simulating how people dream about that stuff and realize that they're still in a shitty place. And just overall, I just think that the music in this record is the peak of Weezer's like emotional, evocativeness. But if we're gonna talk about the lyrics on this record, they're even more. I think they're even like honestly at some points better than the music itself, at least for me, because this record is extremely relatable for me. It's very therapeutic, especially when it comes about girl troubles and stuff like that, which I can definitely relate to. But I think the thing that like also enhances this album much more that I don't think people talk about as much is how Matt Sharp kind of added this really crazy and fun energy to a lot of the songs. And I think the fact that he was only with the band for their self-titled album, Blue Album, and this one is a tragedy because it seemed like was the he was the most fit to be the bassist in this band, not only in just bass playing, but just in how he performed during live shows and just how like he added on to with the vocals by giving off this really charming and chaotic vibe that was only ever reached at this similar point with Mikey Welch's performance. And I'm extremely glad that Matt Sharp and Rivers Cuomo got to play again at California State University. I forget the date, but they played a couple of like songs together, and I'm glad that they were eventually able to heal between and like heal their relationship, and I think that's just really nice to see. But yeah, overall, this album's amazing, and it's also one of my 10s as well.
All right. My favorite tracks from the Blue album are My Name is Jonas, Buddy Holly, The World Has Turned and Left Me Here, Undone the Sweater Song, Surf Wax America, Say It Ain't So, and Holiday. If I had to pick a least favorite track, it would be No One Else, even though I really like that song.
My favorite tracks are all of them. My least favorite are none of them. But shout out to Tired of Sex. It's my favorite Weezer song.
Same here. My favorite songs are favorite tracks are all of them. My favorite track if I had to pick, it would be between. It would have to be between Across the Sea, The Good Life, and Butterfly. But I usually, on a good day, I usually pick Butterfly because that song is just like such a release for me.
Okay, so we did it. We ranked every single Weezer album. Abel, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate your time here.
I love being on here
and
too.
Yeah. And thank you guys so much for checking out today's episode of the Taped Podcast. We really hope that you enjoyed. Name some of your favorite and least favorite Weezer albums down below. Who did you agree with more? Necessary links to everything will be in the description, including Abel's album of the year and Rate Your Music. And yeah, our own individual channels are down there as well as our Twitter and stuff like that. Next episode, we plan on doing a bit of a recap episode in between sometime this week, I think. And yeah, with that in mind, my name's MickyT.
I'm Nostalgia.
And I'm Mr. A. Good night.
See ya!